advisory. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. It is an honor for me to welcome the everything is connected slogan is not just inspiring, but it is a reality in a more interconnected world. And to face global challenges requires collaboration and understanding beyond our borders. We will focus on how to face these global challenges, such as the soil degradation, water scarcity, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. And this slogan reflects the need for collaboration in order to develop holistic solutions adapted to each of the context. Europe and America have different challenges, but same challenges. The role of producer is essential. They need to collaborate with other actors in the sector, and that is key to move towards more sustainable agricultural systems. We will explore how different regions, Africa, Europe, and America, are facing those challenges, and as producers, how they are leading by examples, implementing innovative practices, and collaborating in international projects. We have the honor of having a panel of leading experts. Carlos Cherniak, who is the ambassador, ex-president of the subcommittee of the FAO. We have Emilio Gonzalez, who is the general secretary of the Agriculture and Sustainability ECAF. David Ader, who is the associate director and professor from the University of Tennessee. He has researched the dynamics in populations, the development of sustainable agriculture for smallholders, and he's now studying small communities from sub-Saharan Africa, Central America, and Asia. And Francisco Podestá, who is an engineer and a producer, a consultant who is developing agricultural projects in Uganda and also in Colombia. We will now begin with Carlos. And Carlos, we wanted to ask, what is your vision when it comes to the involvement of the producer in international fora and how this can have an effect on production? Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be here at Aapresid. Thanks for the invite. And I also want to thank Luli and the whole team and everybody in the panel. I prepared some ideas that I want to share with you, and I want to be organized, so I will try to respect those ideas that I wrote down in the last few weeks. My habit with regards to my personal commitment to global food safety is to begin with these type of interventions, trying to bring awareness with regards to the global situation, using especially the most important document of the UN with regards to the World Food Report, which clearly the central message expressed there is that we are going into a dangerous time with very little possibility of eliminating poverty and hunger by 2030. This is something that the international community had committed to achieve, and we are clearly failing. This is something that I think is important, and we should recognize it. Within this realistic frame of mind, one of the expressions that we hear everywhere is the need to transform agri-food systems. And because of the critical situation in world hunger, we should raise production and productivity of the systems, and Argentina and other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean may have to be leaders in this global challenge based on the development and the sustainable growth and inclusive growth of the agricultural sector. But we should begin by assuming the existence of different agroproductive systems, and therefore this is my first message. Any transformation process depends on each context, reality, and need. The global concept that everything should be transformed is complex, and it doesn't have a lot of scientific basis. There are many successful transformations that are available. Many of them stem from the producers themselves. I think this has been demonstrated in this Congress. And the root of those successful transformations has been due to the synergy between the public and the private sector. So this is part of the first message, that is not to break everything to begin from zero, from scratch. There is not just one solution for the complex problems that affect each of the systems. There are various solutions. To recognize the diversity of models and the plurality of solutions is key. And this is important because we have participated in many debates where people said that everything had to be transformed and that the solution was available and ready for all problems that we have. And this is not true. What are the challenges from the agri-food systems? The starting point from my perspective, which I want to clarify, anything that I do say is personally not as a representative of the Argentine government. The second message that I would like to transmit is that the starting point when it comes to challenges are the structural inequality that exists within the country and among countries and even in the same region. There is inequality at structural level, and to that we can add accelerators of that inequality. For example, pandemics, COVID-19, geopolitical conflicts and internal conflicts, the climate change problem, global inflation, chronic indebtedness, the loss and waste of foods. These are accelerators for that inequality. They clearly conform elements for the perfect storm that shows the fragility or the rising fragility on the food systems in most vulnerable regions. The use of the resources such as soil and water, the management of biodiversity, the use of pesticides or antimicrobials in animal production are also part of those challenges. And perhaps the question should be if climate change may be considered an accelerator of structural inequality or whether it has become a structural factor. And therefore, when faced with these challenges, technologies and applied are key to shorten gaps, to integrate value chains and to create better paid jobs, so that young people may want to go to rural areas because there is urbanization everywhere with a more equitable distribution of income. Those innovations and technologies should be for sustainability in three dimensions. We're not just speaking about sustainability at environmental level. We're always speaking about economic, social, and environmental. And those three dimensions need to be balanced and indivisible. But science and applied innovation require both locally, nationally, and regional commitments of a strategy for the transfer of new technologies to strengthen skills and capabilities. And that needs the right funds to be able to achieve it. And this phenomenon is within countries and also on the hands of international organizations that have a mandate for development. This, of course, within the global food safety, agriculture, and livestock, the SOFI report. And the changes have to do with the promotion of healthy diets available and accessible. I would like to conclude with two more messages. The first is to do with the effects of climate change, which are affecting all of the agri-food systems. There is deterioration everywhere, and through our collaborative effort by the international community, this challenge may be faced in order to preserve the sustained development of agriculture, as we preserve the livelihoods of all producers, but especially smallholders and mid-size holders. And this is my fourth message. Our country, our region, the Global South is affected by great environmental threats, even when our countries have not been responsible for the degradation that exists. And therefore, to achieve the sustainability required means that we need financial resources to be able to go through the transitions and to create capabilities and to transfer technologies on the part of developed countries and the climate green funds that, when it comes to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, is clearly a challenge and a commitment that is still pending. More developed countries should satisfy what they signed in the Rio summit, in the Paris Treaty, and in the 2030 Agenda. They cannot ignore those commitments, and they cannot rise commercial trade requirements with the excuse of protecting the environment. This is hypocrisy, clear and simple. And my last message is, especially for producers, what we are discussing in international organizations such as FAO and the UN in general, with the day-to-day reality of producers when they have to plan their production and when they cultivate and get their crops. I hope that when we know that when the diplomats speak about international standards at the FAO about inequity, the waste of foods, codes of conduct with regards to the use of pesticides or plastics in agriculture, or the promotion of unique or plural solutions based on science, all of that clearly affects every one of the producers. These are the big battles in terms of the international arena, and I've had the chance of participating in these, and I know that each of these debates holds the key to the future of many producers in our region and others. With these messages, I believe the key is to understand that there are various models, various solutions, and therefore I am convinced that Argentina, Aapresid, is the right platform to offer solutions or part of the solutions to the complex challenges that we see ahead. Thank you.
Gracias, Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos. You have always been a friend of our association. You have represented us in international fora, and the voice of the producers should be heard in these international events. Now I would like to ask Emilio. He represents the European region. How are you facing the pressure of policies? How producers have been affected, and what is your opinion regarding the conservation practices? Thank you for the invitation. Coming from Europe and seeing so many people, so many producers and companies supporting the conservation agriculture system makes me envious. And I believe it is important to highlight that agriculture in Europe is not easy. How many farmers do we have here? We are competing with other presentations. It's a pleasure to have you here. You have heard that producers have put their tractors on the streets in Madrid, in Berlin, in Brussels.
La presentación anterior y
And also, I was in Paraguay as a different congress, and this was also shown there. The European Union is exerting pressure on foreign markets when it comes to exports. But when you look at the headlines in Europe from last year, you also need to understand that there is a lot of pressure inside Europe. It is not the case that Europe wants to bother others. It is bothering everyone. There are no frontiers on the territory, on the soils, but there are no frontiers in the air because gases circulate freely. We have problems everywhere. The costs are different. The products, when they reach the European market, due to the new regulations of glyphosates in Europe and in Spain, farmers will only be allowed one application of glyphosates per season. In that context, we will have no-till farming, crop rotation, cover crops, and we will have to face that new reality. However, climate change, if you look at China, Chinese might look better than many other countries in the world if you have a calculation per capita. But those gases travel through the atmosphere and they know no borders. So the efforts in Europe and the efforts in Argentina, I believe we need to have a communication tool. We have achieved proposing conservation agriculture as a best system to capture carbon in the soil and to address the global challenge. An example of what is going on in Europe and in Spain. After many years of research, science should always be present. When you go to meetings with ministers and with policymakers, you should always take papers to support your position. And there is a lot of scientific evidence favoring no-till farming. After 6 years in the field, we have convinced the authorities. After 20 years of research, the Spanish Association is only 5 years younger than Aapresid. We were able to achieve regulations in favor of conservation agriculture. APAC promotes till farming, but now we have achieved a shift. They are now considering no-till farming. I also come from the University of Córdoba, so through our efforts, the Ministry of Agriculture of Spain is offering programs for no-till farmers and also for cover crops. And the priorities for the next few years, 700 million euros will be made available to producers in grants, and this has been very well received by the sector. Agriculture in Europe has increased up to almost 4 million hectares. So this cooperation with policymakers, with producers, and with all stakeholders bear fruit. It is not a short-term result. We need to build trust. So the changes that we are creating in Europe, I believe they will also be positive for you. Thank you, Emilio. That's very interesting to hear the European perspective. And now I will turn to David. Considering the approach for small producers. And the question is, what are the main challenges faced by small producers in the regions where you work? And what approaches or strategies do you believe have been effective? And do you have any success story to share in the implementation of projects for small producers? Thank you for receiving us. Spanish is not my mother tongue, but I will try speaking Spanish. I am a professor at a university in Tennessee. I am a professor of sustainable agriculture. To give you an idea of how we approach this topic, we are a public university. Our funds come from the national government, and there are different initiatives that they promote. There is an initiative based on applied research. And the name of this initiative is Feed the Future. It is an initiative of the Obama Forum, and they do this through USAID, an international support agency. This entity is investing to help small producers. There is a focus on food security, but also on the conservation of the environment and climate change. And how do they do it? They have labs of innovation. And these are based in different public universities. And there are different topics. There is one lab for soybean, another one for maize, another one for sorghum, and there is one lab that is focused on sustainable intensification. So the area of focus is how we can intensify the quality and quantity of food that we have without damaging the soil and without expanding the farming areas. This is a big challenge that we are facing. There are many challenges. My students always ask me, after we talk about hunger in the world and climate change and problems, they ask me, what is the solution? And I answer, we don't have a single solution. There are many solutions, but you need to think about technology, appropriation of technology. Many producers around the world are small producers. They have less than 10 or 5 hectares, or where I work, less than 1 hectare. And this is a family of 5 or 6 people, and they are trying to subsist or to live off this small portion of land. I have seen many beautiful things, machinery, technology in this Congress, but this is not applicable everywhere. You need to take into account the conditions of the soil, of the terrain, and the size of the producers. We have to talk about diversification, diversifying the system. But what do we mean by diversifying? Because there are different ways in which we can measure diversification. How can we diversify based on time? We know that many of these producers depend on rainfall, on water. There are seasons during the year where we can produce certain products, and there are other seasons where we can produce other products. I work in Cambodia, a small country in Africa. In Asia, sorry. They produce a lot of Cambodia. They produce a lot of rice, and we know that the conservation agriculture works there. We have 20 years worth of data, and we know that the soils can be improved. We can do more. The problem is that small producers don't have that information. They don't have the outreach system there. So we go to Cambodia and we see how they harvest rice. And we ask, why don't we plant cover crops? And they said, okay, we could do that, but what is the problem? We don't have any fencing. If I plant rice, the cows and the cattle of my neighbors will come to my lot and eat whatever I plant. So it ends up being a social problem because the community has its own habits. They let their cattle to graze out of the different areas, so they need to build fences, but they don't have the money, they cannot afford it. But there are different options. You can have trees that are planted. These are live fences. They can also be a source of food for people and of feed for animals. So there are different uses for these plants. It's a way of diversifying their production during the year because they can plant different products. And it is also, there is another way of diversifying. It has to do with space. Yesterday, they were talking about increasing capacity in a horizontal way, but we can also do it vertically. There are different levels in a forest. There are tall trees, there are shrubs, and there are intermediate levels. So we can take advantage of spaces in a smarter way. We can diversify in terms of time, in terms of space, and also seasons. There is an example. There was a plant fence that had spines, thorns, and it worked well as a fence. And we also asked them, why don't you produce more? You can produce a lot, but if there is no market demand, you cannot sell them. Small producers can produce many things, but they don't have access to the market, or they don't have trucks to deliver their goods, or the roads are not in good conditions. So they depend on other people that come and buy, and they buy at very low prices. These are middlemen, the intermediaries. They are a key link in the chain because they are sometimes in control and they take advantage of poor people who live in the countryside and have no access to the market. How can we change this? This is very difficult. Another way of diversifying. The government is thinking about how to improve food security for children, not just producing for energy, but also what do we have to produce? Proteins, vitamins. Another example, Rwanda. A government is focused on providing proteins for children. We had a project with USAID to see how we can help families have a chicken pen so as to create proteins, that is to say, a source of food for the families, but also they can sell the chicken. And the first time we got there, we were paying for the chicken we bought, and it was like $50. She had never seen so much money in her life. She had never had access to financing services. It's an underserved sector in terms of banking, and for women it's even more complex. So these are societal problems. We are talking about problems in agriculture, but also there are problems with the soils, with pests, with seeds, but there are also cultural and social problems. So these people in Rwanda have changed their mode of subsistence. Now they can sell chicken, but they also use the manure of chicken as fertilizer because they were never able to buy fertilizer, and now they are fertilizing their potato fields with the chicken manure. So we need to think about a circular value chain. We always think about the value chain in linear terms, but this is not a straight line. It is a circular line. These are not items of waste. These are items that can be recycled and reintroduced in the system. How can we change our mindset as producers, as communities, and also the mindset of governments? How we can think about this system to make it more circular, such as the bioeconomy, the circular economy. And this is a challenge we are talking about today. There are many examples we can give. I'm trying to find the right word to express this. There are many concerns and many problems faced by small producers around the world, and finding solutions depends on other stakeholders such as government officers, nutritionists, and also social players. Thank you. Thank you. We could spend hours hearing to your opinions because they are extremely interesting. But now we need to move forward. At Aapresid, we have a goal to share how we produce and to share how we work. There is one regional center, Africa. So we want to hear directly from him. He is an Argentine producer and he is working in Africa. He moved to Africa 9 years ago. Francisco, could you please share your experience and the challenges you faced, the hardest times, and also after 9 years, I can imagine you can also share some good and optimistic points as well. Thank you for this invitation. The challenges to produce in Africa 10 years ago were enormous when we started with this project. To give you some context, Uganda is in the center-east of Africa. There is another country, Kenya, which separates it from the Indic Ocean. There is a huge strip of land of 500 million hectares, which has enormous potential, and there is a lot to be done there because there is very little planting and the productivity is very high. We started working in Uganda, and the reality is very similar to what David was just saying. These are small farmers. They plant a quarter of a hectare. There are some producers that have 5 or 10 hectares, and there are no large producers. There are many. There is a lot of free-range field, and I say that weeds are everywhere. There are thousands of hectares that have not been planted, and we try to do extensive agriculture there. There are many, many challenges.
Basically, how to set up a team of people with the African culture that can actually carry out this mega project. We need people who can drive all the machineries, the generators, the tractors, and a team of engineers and technicians who can regulate those machineries. At the beginning, I brought a couple of Argentine engineers to help me, and for the past 3-4 years, it's just a local team. It was hard to do. The culture is very different, but we managed to do it. The company is very much set up with all processes in place, and after 10 years, the organization feeds itself from those processes, and we incorporate people that incorporate those processes, and right now we are in a process where it's easier to grow as an organization. But the first few steps were, of course, very complex. And the second challenge was the agricultural one. How to do it there. What we as Argentines know how to do that for us is very normal because we grow up with non-tillage. Everybody knows about that. For us, it is the only way to produce. There's no other way in a sustainable way. My partners from the US were not very interested in that, but in the end, in that region, it rains 1,500 millimeters a year, so you can sow twice. And no-till has a lot of benefits there that we all know, but they're even more important there than here. The efficiency of water usage is critical. There are soils that are arid there. We know the improvement in filtration, all of those things to do with the soil that we can see very palpably there. And also, we have to do 2 plantings a year. After a week after having the harvest, we have to re-sow. So that first phase was very difficult. They did not know about non-till farming there. My partners were not very much convinced with it. We had operations managers from England and such who had never seen that system. It was really hard to convince them. In the end, we were able to do it after 4 years. We do 2 crops a year. So after 8 campaigns of sowing, we managed to get to an 80 or 90% of no-till farming. The benefits were seen immediately. Operationally, this was very, very clear, because the second challenge is no-till farming, but we have to do crop rotation. We all know that no-till farming is a system, and in order to do that, we could rotate crops between grasses, maize, soybeans, etc. So now we're doing that. We have a rotation between maize and soybeans now, with always grasses in the middle. And we began to see benefits, and the other challenge as a third party was the third challenge. We had a D-Day on the 5th of April, the 10th of April. We have to sow the first crop because otherwise we don't get enough time for the second one. So a lot of the plots are free, and when they're free, they were abandoned, and when they were abandoned, the weeds would go. Remember that in Africa, or there is no soy nets or anything like that. So that was a big challenge. So the third concept that we managed to introduce is that plots always need to be with a crop, either maize, either soybeans or beans. And it has to be a short crop otherwise, or a service crop. We began a couple of years ago working on that. Our star crop right now is sunken, which is in 2 months, it produced 10,000 kilos of wood, dry wood. Now we are sowing maize, but it really grew. It was incredible. We analyzed it, and that, by having this live crop on the soil, we managed to get clean plots. As I've always said, let us build clean plots. If you always control weeds, you will have cleaner crops every time. And in fact, our protocol that is very intense in the use of herbicides, we have begun to eliminate them because the plots are cleaner. We haven't had any resistant weeds so far. So it was a great challenge, and there is a whole chapter with smallholders, of course, and how we, for them, what for us is very normal to do no-till soybean and maize, for them is quite remarkable, and there's many people who are copying us and looking at us, and I believe that it is a way to say, how can we disseminate these sustainable systems, but leading by example with a, of course, successful example. Thank you, Francisco. We are on time. We have one more question, but it would be too long. We want to thank everybody for being here. and for being interested in this panel. I think it was great. And now you can stay and talk with the panelists if you wish. Aapresid has as a fundamental pillar the way of working interconnectedly, and we want to work with academics, with different organizations, both international and national, and this is part of our commitment from the sector of international collaboration in Aapresid to have an impact both at an environmental and social level and economic level. It was a pleasure to listen to everybody. Thank you for being here.